grace and forgiveness for ourselves as well as for others, but for sure for ourselves, are the keys to really, really getting into making progress with these conscious relationships.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Sabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. I'm your host, Ashton Sabo. Today's show is all about conscious relationships. What does that even mean? What are they? How do we cultivate conscious relationships in our lives? Today, to help discuss this topic with us is Katie Vessel. She is a student and teacher of yoga. She's a mother. She's a holistic health coach. And her articles, she's a freelance writer whose articles have been read by nearly 1 million people. She's also currently writing a book on relationship. Really happy to have her on the show today. Katie, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be with you today.
Oh, we're happy to have you. So, I don't know if you're familiar with this study. There was a study that was done. It's called the Harvard Grant Study. It was a 75-year-long study. And what they were looking at was what makes people happy. And so they were studying people over this long period of time. And in our culture, we're tend to fed the idea that success and fame and money, once you get those things, then you'll finally get happy. And what this study very clearly showed was that it's not fame or money or success that is the most important factor in people's happiness. It's actually the strength and quality of their relationships with their family, their friends, and their spouses. And I think that's so important that gets communicated to people, especially in our culture, because we're so fed this idea that really the most important thing is, well, you got to get that job so you can make that money. Once you have that money, then you can buy the things that will make you happy. And not only do spiritual traditions tell us otherwise, but now we even have it in our own hard science showing that doesn't actually work. But I find what the challenge even with that is, once we acknowledge that, is, well, we're not really taught in our culture how to have healthy relationships. It's not like part of the handbook that we get growing up. So this is where the idea of conscious relationships come in. And I want to, for our listeners out there, to kind of get a sense of consciousness is one of those words that's often kind of thrown around. What do you mean when you say a conscious relationship?
Well, first, I want to address this study and the notion. I think that that's very true. I think that, happy relationships, healthy relationships, it is one of the most important things in our lives. And I believe that relationships are the threshold to everything. It's the way that we relate to our world, including other people as well as other things in our world. Reflect as a reflection of how we're relating to ourselves. That really is that's really the key to any kind of real, I don't even want to use the word happiness, but joy or peace or some of those other types of states that we can find. Our culture does a lot of times tell us that relationships will make us happy, but I think that, you hear it in the pop songs and movies and everything like that. Like you need to find the guy, you need to have the girl, you need to have all of these things. And a lot of it is contingent on the relationship, having the house and having the kids and taking your trips and, and that's great. I mean, that is all part of it, but I think that we're going about it all backwards. And I think that that's the first step in really learning how all of this can happen is by flipping it all on its head and not going for the goals and rather going for the moments. And that is what a conscious relationship is. It's really being present for the moments. It's having gratitude for the time that the other person is giving you. It's their time. They don't have to give that to you. It's really having a willingness to both learn from how you're interacting and what the dynamic is, as well as having an awareness and an acceptance and grace for yourself during that learning process so that there won't be any sort of resistance to looking at where we can grow and the opportunities that we have to grow within ourselves in order to have a better relationship with not just other people, but our entire world.
Well, and would you say that a conscious relationship really starts with the self? Like you can't really go out there in the world and be having all these thriving relationships outside if you don't have a healthy, thriving relationship inside with yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I think that that's something that a lot of, in Eastern philosophies and things of that nature, that's something that is commonly taught. But I think that to really realize that and to really take that on and to really be accountable and to realize that we are responsible for our own energy, our own thoughts, our words, our actions. I was working with somebody actually just last week, and really wonderful lady, and she was talking about how, she had been in this marriage for the last, a number of decades. I don't know specifically how long. She's in her early 60s. And, she was just talking about what this man has done to her and how difficult it's been to be around him for all these decades and how she's just depleted and she's just, kind of felt stuck. And I very compassionately reminded her that it's not about him. It's not about what he's doing to her. It's not about how he's making her feel. It's about how she is choosing to feel. And it's about how, she has the decision and she has chosen to be with him. And that's kind of where it starts, is just realizing that you've had that choice all along and that every day there's freedom in that and there's opportunity in that as well. Every day, if you're choosing to be with someone, and that somebody else is choosing to be with you, what an honor. I mean, like that right there, that being intentional about even spending your time together, once you really take that on and be accountable for, okay, yes, I am choosing this. I think that that's something, it's a start, maybe even a seed to how we can go about relating differently to that other person, because that it becomes intentional, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think that choice, and you really touch on it there, is a critical aspect of it, because I used to kind of go around and a bit of a hopeless romantic, and I was always kind of searching for that perfect ideal situation or mate. And if they weren't living up to those ideals, then I was projecting those ideals on them. That projection was causing friction in the relationship, and that it would ultimately kind of spoil the relationship. And it wasn't until I recognized that, it's not about finding some perfect ideal. It's about making a choice. Like, I choose to be with this person. And because of that choice, I know now that I'm going to interact with their stuff, my stuff. It's not going to go away. Hopefully we can progress and work on things together, but it really requires that commitment to a choice. That, I recognize that there are going to be issues. There's no, I think that the idea that there's one soulmate out there, meaning that there's one perfect person that you're never going to argue with and there's never going to be any problems and it's all going to be flowers and puppy dogs and rainbows the whole time, really sabotages us, because I think we're human beings. We all have stuff. And so committing to a choice to be with someone really alters the dynamic. But of course, that's not enough. And that's kind of the next thing I want to do. Okay, we make a choice to be with someone. But what would you say then become the next steps in actually creating more conscious relationships? Okay, I've chosen to be with someone, but now what? Because we both still have all of our stuff. We both trigger one another. What's the next step in that process, or what are the next steps in that process?
Well, my friends get on my case a lot of times about, how critical I can be. And I think, that's a strength and it's a weakness. But, when it comes to a lot of these things, I think that even the wording and how we are framing some of this in our minds, if we're thinking, okay, I have chosen to be with this person, then it's kind of like if we sign off on, if we get married and we sign off on some marriage agreement, I often think of it as being somewhat contractual when you're in a marriage, because of course that's not what it's supposed to be, but that's what it kind of ends up being. It's okay, well, we're kind of locked into this now. And I'm not trying to put everybody into this box, but I think that there is a tendency that's there. And this doesn't go, for all relationships, but for example, with a marriage, you chose it. Maybe it was 12 years ago, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, maybe it was decades ago, like the woman I was working with a couple of weeks ago. But it's after that, are you still choosing it? And from that point on, once you realize that you are still choosing it and that you are free to leave that relationship at any point in time. And maybe you have your own philosophies on that. Maybe you have children. Maybe you have all of these other things that are kind of binding your lives together, like you have the house and, this and that, all of those pragmatic things as well. But I think when we're doing anything intentionally, I think that right there will take care of a lot of the difficulty, because we are choosing it. And once we realize that we're choosing it, there's so much more to be grateful for. And I was struggling with somebody once, and I had a friend of mine tell me, and this was good advice, I thought, that she told me to write down on one side of a piece of paper all of the things about him that I was really struggling with, and then all of the things, about him on the other side of the paper that I really, really loved. And that was an opportunity for me to really see, okay, how much of this is projection? How much of these things that and it usually isn't really clear. It's not a cut and dry thing, but usually what we're seeing in struggling with in that other person, it usually falls into, in my opinion, it falls into two different categories. And of course you could expand on this and make there be a lot more categories than two. But I think that a lot of times we are projecting, and what we're seeing is a variation of something that we're struggling within ourselves. And the second area of things that we're struggling with somebody else is, okay, this is something that's different. It's not something that's like me. So it's almost like that homophobic or xenophobic type of tendencies that we can have. Like, this is something that's foreign to me. This person is really different. Well, if that's the case, then what can I learn from that? And maybe how can I even appreciate that? So I think that I know it sounds cheesy, but I'm one of those people that has become a big proponent of writing things down and becoming somewhat, taking the emotion out of it a little bit and kind of trying to work with things in that manner.
What would you say is the biggest obstacle for people that really want to live with more conscious relationships? Like, is there one thing? Is it different for everybody? In your experience, what would you think is that obstacle, or the biggest obstacle?
Well, for sure, in my opinion, and the way that I have seen these dynamics occurring, and I do just want to be clear here. I know, we've been talking a lot about like romantic relationships and partnerships and marriage. I originally started writing this book about our relationships with our self, and how that's kind of the gateway to our relationships with our partners, our parents. That's another really prickly one. Our peers, as well as the planet. How are we relating to all of that? And I've really expanded to how are we relating with our ego? How do we relate to fear? And I think the biggest barrier to all of this is really that inability or resistance to really looking at ourselves. And what that falls into is typically guilt and shame. So we don't want to look at these things that we've done because we feel shame for them or we feel guilty about them. Guilt typically comes from our perceptions of, what other people are expecting of us, and shame comes from the perception of what we are expecting of ourselves or have expected of ourselves. So that's the difference between guilt and shame, in my opinion. But those are the barriers to really looking at ourselves. And the way, that you often hear that the best solutions to any complex problem are typically quite simple, and that, it's grace. It's forgiveness for yourself, and understanding that, in the past, we were doing the best that we could do with the knowledge that we had, with the tools that we were aware of, with our capacity that we had at that time. And it's just being gentle with ourselves and saying, almost like you would to a child, you did your best. Let's see what we can do better, and let's keep going. And it's not always going to be perfect. We are human, and humanity is a practice. And I think that, grace and forgiveness for ourselves, as well as for others, but for sure for ourselves, are the keys to really, really getting into making progress with these conscious relationships.
Beautiful. And so let's say someone has started to do this work. They're looking at themselves more clearly. They're understanding that, other people, whether it's a romantic relationship or not, are reflections of their own stuff. They're really wanting to do the work. They're wanting to cultivate more conscious relationships. And let's say that they're in an actual partnership right now. How does someone sort of bridge that gap? How do they, is there things that they can say or things that they should be doing to help cultivate more conscious relationships with whether it's a romantic partner or even, let's say, their friends or their parents. I think those are all like valid topics of relationship, especially as you mentioned, they tie into one another so much. Like, how do you take it from, okay, I'm willing to do the work on myself, but now how do you encourage that, since it's not something that's necessarily encouraged in our culture, how do you encourage that in your, for lack of a better term, like bubble or of relationships?
Well, I think that, this is different for everybody, but what it all boils down to is that relationship with the self. And that's going to be about nourishing yourself. It's going to be about loving yourself. It's going to be about finding joy in whatever ways that you can, whether that's, your favorite kind of tea, or maybe it's some music, getting back to music. I know a lot of times in my life when I've really been struggling, I have these moments where I'm just like, wow, I haven't even been listening to music for like 3 months, or I've found these little, tendencies that I have when I'm really kind of starting to lose myself a little bit in, I've gone through a very contentious divorce and some other really challenging times in my life, and I see kind of what happens and I pay attention to those things. Okay, what is it that I do, and what are these things that are kind of like little wake-up signs to me that I need to kind of come back to myself? And that's going to look different for everybody. Going off on your own and isolating yourself is not, well, first of all, there are two ways that we isolate ourselves, right? Like, we can isolate ourselves as if in this way of pity almost, as if, all of our relationships are failing and we're not doing anything right and we're better off just banishing ourselves from society and from our friends and our family and our partners and everybody, and just kind of going into this isolated state that kind of stems from dis-ease. Or we can choose kind of an isolated state. We can choose to kind of go into that state in order, with the intention of having an opportunity to bring ourselves back to that wholeness and to bring ourselves back to joy and to bring ourselves back into a healthy relationship with ourselves. And that's an opportunity right there. So extreme case, you take that time, and I have actually done this. I have taken that time by myself to nourish myself, and it was for about, time frame doesn't matter, it was for a while. And I don't want to give anybody any ideas or, what's right or wrong, or because I don't know what's right or wrong for them, but that's something that they need to discern. But that's something that I had to do, and I really had to just learn how to love myself again and to find that independence so that I could go back to learning what healthy boundaries were with people. And from that state, I think it's, we have a lot more of a vantage point, but we want to be careful. We don't want it to be in that state for too long, because we are here to coexist. We are here to have community. We are here to be in relationship with each other and to learn from that and to find that edge. Okay, how much can I love you via loving myself, while still having that, whatever type of boundary is appropriate to where I am not reacting to you in a way that is not loving. And I think that's really important.
Well, and you touch on a few points, and I'm curious to kind of get your opinion on this. So, I love, like, obviously we have the idea of choice. And we also have this concept like, hey, we need to be nourishing ourselves. And there's also a lot of our own sort of self-worth involved in all this sort of stuff, and the necessity of taking care of ourselves so we feel worthy of relationships. And I'll sort of speak for myself, and, it's a lot easier for me to be alone. You want to tempt me with a good time. You tell me I can go do like a 10-day Vipassana, like go and sit and meditate all day and not talk to people. I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Relationships are really challenging for me. My plan was to become a monk. I was going down that path. The universe had different plans for me. So I struggle in relationship. And I think something that I see, and this goes back to the choice of like, I'm choosing to be in a relationship. The flip side of that, and tying into what you just said, is that sometimes then we make this choice, okay, well, I'm going to leave this situation. And sometimes that might be a completely valid choice. But where does escapism play a role in this? Because I think it can lead to that side of, okay, well, I have this choice, and yes, I need time for myself, so I'm going to avoid relationships. And you said there is no time frame for that sort of thing. But when we look at it over a period of time, like how much of a struggle is escapism, do you think? Or what kind of role does that play in this whole theater of conscious relationships?
I want to say it comes down to the energy of it. And I know that that's kind of hard maybe for a lot of people to understand, but it's that feeling that you have and what is your intention. I mean, people, you know, I've had times when I've been able to center myself and kind of pull myself back together after, you know, really kind of wobbling with, you know, when it comes to my energy and just struggling with people emotionally. And, okay, I am not reacting to this situation or this dynamic in a very loving, compassionate, empathetic way. So I need to figure out what I need to do here. I think that, you know, it can be an hour or it can be a month or, you know, and I think that there's a really, really important discernment process that needs to take place with everybody. And that's something that we need to be, it's something that we need to be accountable for. You know, okay, at what point I found that joy with myself and whatever, but now I'm kind of being lazy and I'm kind of, you know, getting a little bit stagnant. And I think that we can tell when we're avoiding versus when we're still in that energy of, okay, I'm doing this because I'm wanting to kind of bring myself back together and I'm wanting to just find that centered place and, you know, where I'm better able to love other people and better able to respond to them, and you know, in the way that I said, with compassionate and loving, empathetic ways. You know, some people have asked me, well, why even do it? Why even bother being in relationships? And it's like, well, you know, that's our opportunity here. I've written before, you know, that we're here to have an experience. We're here to love and we're here to play. And I think, sure, we can go off on a 10-day retreat. You know, I love to be by myself. I love to go hiking by myself. But I also love, and this is something that I think our ability to appreciate and love other people and appreciate the experience with other people is kind of a reflection of our ability to appreciate and experience ourselves. And if I can go hiking with somebody else, and if we can sit on, you know, a cliff and have our feet dangling over the edge, and, you know, if I can get something that's really interesting, and if I can be curious, you know, what experience are you having here? You know, I think it was Steve Jobs or somebody like that talked once about how important it was, you know, if a number of people are sitting in a room and there's an object in the middle of the room, and, you know, one person sees this object from their point of view and somebody else sees it from their point of view, and, you know, you think you see the full object, but then you hear this other person's feedback, and you could be looking at this three-dimensional object. You have no idea what's on the other side. If you're not moving, you're only seeing it as like this two-dimensional presence in the room. And I think that that's something that I really value when it comes to not just partners, but peers, my children. My children are 2 and 4 years old, and I love being able to interact with them, to just see the world in the way that they see it. It's expansive for me. You know, and I think that that's really something that we miss out on when we're not open to hearing and appreciating the experiences of others and interacting with them in a way that's opportune to growth.
Well, I definitely agree as well that a real sign of attainment for me is actually not just someone's relationship with themselves, but their relationship and their ability to relate to others. I know a lot of people that are really deep meditators, and like they seem in their perfect situation that they got it all settled, but then you look at them in their romantic relationships or their friendships, and they're horrible at it. And I would probably even, you know, include myself in that category. Like, I've done a lot of personal work, but I struggle in relationships, and I recognize that struggle is a reflection of the stuff that I'm still working on. So when I do see someone that is able to like love through things that would otherwise trigger me, I'm like, okay, they've worked through something here. There's an opportunity for me to see that and grow from that. And I think for all of us to really recognize that as a reflection of the inner world, which we can't see, is to look at this sort of outward experience of how people are treating other people. And I think that's a really good metric for kind of seeing this. I got one real final question. And that if you were, let's say, in an elevator, you got to, you know, it's a long elevator, maybe at least a couple of minutes going up or down, but you have someone that turns to you and they're struggling with their relationships. They want to have more conscious relationships. You only have, you know, a minute or two. You don't have time to hear their whole story and kind of get to the specifics of what they're doing. What kind of advice would you give someone as a more global idea of like, how can we really cultivate more of these conscious relationships in our lives?
Well, I had a teacher who very not long ago mentioned to me, and I think that she summed this up in a way, her name is Emily Hall, and I think that she summed this up in a way that better than anything that I could say right now in this moment. And she said that when it comes to relationships, having healthy relationships, we have two options. She said we can choose to interact with that other person in a loving way choose to interact and engage with that other person in a loving way through a healthy love for ourselves, or we can choose to disengage with that other person in a loving way through a healthy love for ourselves. And I think that, that kind of covers everything. I mean, like, that will guarantee everything will be loving. It's the discernment over, okay, when can I do this while still, recognizing my capacity for how patient I can be, for how compassionate I can be, for how empathetic I can be. And I know for me that changes from day to day. There are some people that I would have a lot more acceptance for today than I maybe would have had when I was under the weather last week. I mean, I think that it really is something to pay attention to, and it's something to be present for in each and every moment. And I mean, that's really what this is all about. So if you're looking for an answer that kind of encompasses all of it, I think that really does a good job of it. And, am I able to engage in a loving way? And if so, what can I do? Where's my opportunity for growth here? What kind of boundary do I need to set up? And that those do need to change. I'm not an advocate for permanent boundaries, hardly ever. People are constantly evolving. People are constantly changing. Our energy and our capacities are constantly in flux. And so I think that, there are no real black and white answers here, but I think that that's what I would say to the person in the elevator. Hopefully it was a really long elevator ride.
Yeah. I still think you cut in those couple of minutes there. Well, and I think it does very much come back to awareness as well, because as what you're saying that, for one to recognize that, like, oh, I'm getting angry right now. Well, maybe it was because I only got 4 hours of sleep last night and I haven't had breakfast yet. Or like you said, it changes moment to moment, day to day, what our capacities and tolerances are, and to sort of interact and engage both ourselves and others. And we need that willingness to be aware of the totality of what's going on in the moment to really address it. So to recognize, wow, I can project my anger off on my partner right now, or my friend, or whoever that's in front of me, because, well, they did this. But recognizing, like, man, if I had just gotten enough sleep last night and maybe had a better meal this morning, I wouldn't even be bothered by this at all. So to have more of that perspective through your awareness, I think, is also a really important piece to live in that space of love. So whether, again, it's lovingly stepping towards the relationship or lovingly stepping away, to have the awareness in the moment to really recognize your reasons and motivations behind things.
Exactly. So, and then when we choose to step away, going back to that, how do I find joy? How do I nourish myself? How do I love myself? Because the more we do that, the more capacity we will have, for acceptance and for compassion and for empathy and, all of that. So just constantly coming back to that. How can I love myself? How can I nourish myself in order to be able to better love and nourish all of those around me?
And there's an old Osho story that kind of sums that up, or something he used to say that sums that up quite beautifully. He said that, if you have an empty cup, and you're trying to give from that cup, then you're constantly being depleted. But if you fill your own cup up and the cup is overflowing, well, give people the overflow, and then you're not getting depleted. But it comes with, first, you have to be coming from that place of a full cup, and that's where so much of that self-love comes in, and then you can overflow that on to others. But it's one of those cliches, but it really ends up being true that it does come back to love and to self-love first, and then that love can expand onto everyone else. So I love that. So yeah. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and your understanding and being on the show. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, I have my website is katievessel.com. That's a pretty good, that's all of my writings, links to all of my writings and everything else that I'm doing. I'm working on a number of projects right now that it's all on my website.
Awesome. Okay. And Katie Vessel, it's in case someone is not around to be reading it, is Katievessel. Again, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we can have you back again sometime. Love to hear more about the writing process when your book is coming out. So hopefully, we could do a follow-up then. For all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for listening today. This is the Savannah Podcast. I'm Ashton Sabo, and we are talking with Katie Vessel. I hope you all have a very present and conscious moment. Namaste.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the show today. Please go over to iTunes, write a review, let us know what you think. It helps us in creating new content for all of you. It also helps new listeners get a sense of what to expect from the show. We really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.